G'day viewers, my name is Oren Thomas and this is...
Kia ora tātou, my name is Sonia Calvin from my homeland of Aotearoa, New Zealand. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Now, we are here to talk to you about one of the most exciting brand new announcements at Microsoft Ignite, file sharing on Windows Server.
Yes. Now, why are we talking to you about that? Because it's something that almost every organisation on the planet actually does. And no matter where you go, no matter where you look, no matter what you're looking at, there's probably an organisation out there that's got a couple of file servers. And we talk about all of this exciting stuff, all about the machine learning, about the synergies, about the artificial intelligence. But the reality is that most organisations are out there writing Word docs, Excel spreadsheets and PowerPoints, and they're saving them somewhere. And because these servers are not particularly exciting, even though they do a really critical job, most people don't sit there and think, well, how do we actually look after them? So, what are we talking about, Sonia, specifically?
Well, I love this first bullet point, modernising. That seems to be the buzzword for IT operations of our time, right? What the heck does modernising mean? If we still want to keep these file servers on premises, notice the correct use of that term, how do we take advantage of some of the newer capabilities and even some of the older capabilities you might not know about? Next, we're going to talk about hardening these file servers, and as data becomes even more an attack target for people who are getting into our organisations, exfiltrating that data, and we see data breaches all the time. So there are some things that you can do, even down at that Windows Server operating level, to help improve the security at that level.
Now, it's really important to think about hardening from another perspective. We talk about domain dominance. We talk about attackers coming in, trying to get into your Active Directory. But the way that attackers monetize their attacks is they often get to your file servers, encrypt all the stuff, ask you for a ransom, or exfiltrate it, encrypt it, and ask you for a ransom. So just don't think about protecting your identity infrastructure. You should be really thinking about protecting and hardening your file server infrastructure. And then the last thing we're going to talk about was this idea of the distributed hybrid file services. And the thing with distributed hybrid file services is it's trying to address this problem that Satya sort of, touched upon with the AI. AI will find your files. The reality is that most people who work with information technology are not IT people. They have to actually be able to find where files are. And anybody who's shared a file with someone in Teams or seen it in SharePoint somewhere and then tried to find it a few weeks later knows it's not the most intuitive experience in the world. The reality is, a long time ago, we came up with a methodology or a rubric for finding stuff. / for the file server name / share. It turns out that's a really good way and a really intuitive way to actually allow people to find files. But if you've got files spread from here to Sydney to somewhere in New Zealand, anywhere in the cloud, you've got to be able to find it simply. And setting up a distributed hybrid file services is actually a good way of doing that.
Absolutely.
So we're going to start
with a demo.
Now, we've recorded these, and the reason we've recorded these is a lot of this stuff takes a while to actually get going. So rather than you waiting for a little grey bar to go across the screen, we're actually going to cut those bars out. I know that we've taken some of the excitement out of your life because many of you do get paid a lot of money to watch bars go across screens.
Oren, what on earth Windows Server 2008 R2? Now, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands if anybody's running 2008 R2 in this audience, because I know you better than that, right?
Yeah.
But seriously?
Yeah. Now, there's a reason we started with 2008 R2. Because why? Because your file server ain't like my son in the morning. It doesn't whinge at you, right? It just gets the job done. And we know in IT, squeaky wheels get the grease. And when a squeaky wheel gets the grease, that's the box that gets upgraded. Now, if your file server's sitting there ticking over, doing what it needs to do, are you going to go, yeah, mate, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go and spend a couple of hours mucking around with you to upgrade you. Because everybody in this room knows that if something's working, you don't muck around with it.
Okay, but you should patch it.
Yeah, you patch it, right? But that's the other thing about 2008 R2. End of support, no more patches.
Let's fix that, shall we?
Okay, so what we're talking about in this particular demo is we're going with 3 Windows Server 2008 R2 servers. One's in Melbourne, one's in Sydney, and one's in Adelaide. There's a bit of local colour for you. And they're configured with distributed file system. Distributed file system, that wonderful way of replicating data. Well, kind of wonderful. Anyway, we're going to do something with it. What are we going to do, Sonia?
Let's go. Well, we're going to upgrade these boxes. And the thing with upgrading the servers that are holding your files is people have grown accustomed to be able to go to that place to get that file. And so we want to minimize any amount of downtime as we can, and we want to do a nice seamless transition, because also along the way there's a really good chance that some application developers came along and thought it was a really good idea to hard code file paths for their application. So who knows what the heck will break if we do a migration.
Okay, so let's show you the data. Here we've got a bunch of folders. We've got Jupiter, Mars, Mercury, Saturn, Venus, and Ned's dogs. Right? So when you're migrating a file server, it's not just the files, it's the permissions on the shares. So as you can see here, the way that we've got it set up, it's fairly easy to understand. Mars shared folder has the Mars group set for permissions. The Mercury shared folder has the Mercury group shared permissions, and of course Ned's dogs has Ned's dogs as permissions. So you can see we've got a bunch of just test files. This is a demonstration to you. Okay, so the next thing that we want to actually go and show you is, some of you all have flashbacks here. Here's the Server Manager console from Windows Server 2008 R2. I'm sure that none of you see these in any of your production environments. And we're expanding here DFS management. And what we're showing you is that we've got a DFS namespace, Tailwind Traders .internal/Tailwind files. And if we double click in on this, we see all of the shared folders. So for those of you who need a bit of remedial DFS, what you do is you go into Windows Explorer, you go //tailwindtraders.internal/Tailwind files, and then you'd see here Jupiter, Mars, Mercury, Saturn, Venus, and Ned's dogs. And when you clicked on one of those folders, it would direct you to the closest endpoint based on your Active Directory site, to Adelaide, to Melbourne, or Sydney.
So we were doing URLs before they were cool, right? Our end users don't care what server in particular is serving up the information. They just want to be able to type in one address and know that they're getting the latest copy of the information.
Now, with this particular setup, what we've got is we've got one server that's functioning as the namespace server. That is the one that's informing Active Directory of where those endpoints are. And when you're doing an upgrade of DFS, you've got to make sure that you don't take down your namespace server and not put it back, because that means no one can find anything and it's like a normal Monday at work. So here we've got our replication groups, and we select our replication groups, and you can see here that we've got each of these folders replicating. So we've got on Adelaide, Melbourne, and Sydney, the E:/Jupiter folder on each one of those servers is replicating it. All we're doing here is we're showing you the before part of our specific set of tricks. Okay, so what I've done is I've jumped across to a server that has going to be our administrative server, basically like a jump box or an administrative workstation. And all we've done is we've gone into Windows Explorer here, we've typed in Tailwind Traders, Tailwind files, and that's what it looks like for your average punter who's just navigating the file system. And if we go into Ned's dogs, we click on a Ned's dogs, we get the Ignite File server, absolute demo required, picture of Ned Pyle's dogs. And Ned is on the chat to answer questions if you've got some.
Ask him about his dogs.
Okay, so first thing we're going to do, on this particular box, it's running Windows Server 2022, and we're going to go and install the DFS Management Console because it's not actually sitting in Windows Admin Center. The other thing we're going to install, you can see using PowerShell there, is storage migration services. Because what we're going to do is we're going to take those 2008 servers and then we're going to migrate the file shares, the files, and the identity of those servers across to 2022. And we're doing that all from one box running Windows Server 2022. And what we've done here is we've done a remote PowerShell session across to a temporary box that will serve as the template server for our new Adelaide file server. We go into the eVolume, and all I'm doing by showing you a directory there is saying, look, Mum, there's nothing sitting on the E drive. I have not started this with an actual migration.
Yeah, so this is our destination Windows Server 2022 Core Edition box, where we're going to stage these files over to, and we prepared one of those earlier so that you didn't have to sit through the setup process.
Okay, so we've gone into the DFS Management Console, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take that Windows Server 2008 R2 server, Adelaide, and we're going to remove it from replication. So we've taken replication off that particular machine. It's no longer replicating with that DFS set. We're then going to jump into PowerShell. We're going to have a remote connection across to that 2008 R2 box, File Server Adelaide 1. We're going to remove the DFS replication feature from that box. It's now removed, and then we're going to bounce the box so that there's nothing present there, because we want that box to not have as many entanglements as might be possible when we're going to perform a migration. Okay, so we then connect to this local box and we select Storage Migration Services, which you saw us select. Now, Storage Migration Services, for those that don't know, is this excellent tool that is designed to move file servers from old file servers to new file servers. And Storage Migration Services will work with Windows Server 2003 and later. It'll also work with Samba file shares. It'll also work with NAS storage. We're going to use it to catalog, identify those 2008 R2 boxes, and then move it to 2022. And then when it's on the 2022, we're going to light back up DFS so that it then participates in the replication cluster again.
Yeah, and I like the fact that with this job, it's actually going to go and interrogate that source server. So I don't need to sit there and specify and try to figure out where my file shares are. This is going to go through and have a look at that source box and go, hey, this is the file shares that you've got configured. Which ones do you want?
Now, one of the reasons for the necessity of storage migration services is a lot of these old file servers have what we call character. And when we're talking about file servers having character, we mean that people are referring to them in logon scripts using IP addresses. NetBIOS names. There's a reason that Wins is still on a lot of people's networks, even though it shouldn't be. DNS names. We don't know how people are referring to file shares, and sometimes we're not even aware of what file shares are actually on a file server. Storage Migration Services, when it interrogates a server, will actually provide us with this information.
Yeah, and doing it through Windows Admin Center, it's going to go through and install all of the required components for that storage migration service onto the boxes that we're using it with.
So we've provided credentials. It's going out to that old Adelaide server. We're doing a scan, and what it's going to do now is it's going to pick up all of the identity information, all the account information, all of the address information, and all of the share information of those servers. The next thing we're doing here is we're specifying the credentials for our template server, the server whose identity we're going to take that 2008 R2 server and then stamp it on to a 2022 server. So we can see that that's Tailwind Traders Temp Adelaide.
There's a reason you've put temp in the name. We'll get to that.
Yes, but what it's also now showing us is it's showing us in this list, it's showing us all of the shares that are picked up on the 2008 R2 server, and it's saying Sonia and Oren, which of these do you actually want to include in your migration?
Yeah.
And we want to include all of them except for one related to printing.
Probably not the print share.
So we click Next. This is our validation settings. This is all of the check marks. Are you sure? Has this failed? Let's do it again. Do we need to install any extra features? Now, in this case, it's going to go and install the proxy feature, which allows the 2022 box to accept that incoming file traffic. We then click Next. We run a validation. The validation sometimes doesn't pick up that that proxy is installed, so you might get a warning. Then we just click Start the Transfer, and what it does is it picks up all that content that's sitting on that 2008 R2 server, and it drops it over on the 2022 server, and it also then sets up the appropriate shares and the permissions. But at this stage, it hasn't done the identity stuff. So what we're going to do is we're just going to validate that that's actually occurred. So we go across to the temp box, we go into the E folder, we do a directory, and we see that those folders have now transferred across to that particular file share. And if we go into the Ned's Dogs directory, we see that we've got a bunch of files there. Excellent. So the next phase in this migration is actually then taking the identity of that 2008 R2 server and then going, right, we're going to clone you and we're going to make you a brand new 2022 server. And we can go in, we can have it go in and adjust DHCP leases, make sure it's got the same IP address, make sure it's got as much of the same identity information. And then what it'll do is it'll take that 2008 R2 server, it'll file off the serial numbers, it'll give it a temporary name, and then it'll leave it by the side of the road. Now, if you're worried, you can come back and look at that 2008 server and then drag anything off you want, but it will no longer have the name Adelaide. Adelaide will be assigned to that new 2022 server.
Yeah, and that is one of the coolest things, right? It's about, I don't have to manually interrogate my source server, write down all the settings, make sure I'm configuring the new box to be the same. The service will take everything that was on that old box in terms of networking configuration, cut the name across, rename the server. And so all of those legacy things that might have been pointing to an IP address or might have been pointing to an actual server name are now still going to work.
And so now we've just done a flip. And now what we're looking at is the console of the migrated server. And you can see here from the name, it is now Hybrid Tailwind Traders File Server Adelaide 1. But you can see that's sconfig. That's running on server 2022. So now that we've done that, we're going to go and install DFS replication. So we've migrated all those files, we've migrated the identity, we then go and DFS replication, and we're also installing the DNS namespace server, because remember, we've got to, as part of this migration, move the namespace server along as well. So what we're doing now is we are adding this newly migrated server back to the original DFS configuration and saying, right, you're going to participate in the replication. So for this part of the migration, it's actually in the process of replicating with those 2008 R2 servers. Once we've done that, we can then go and add a new namespace server so that we've now got two namespace servers, one on 2008 R2, one on 2022, and they're both load balancing the naming. Once we've gone and done that, we then continue the migration. We pick up the Sydney server. We take it from 2008 R2 to 2022. We then go and install all of those elements. We go through and then we finally take Melbourne out. We remove the namespace server from Melbourne. We migrate Melbourne, and then we come across and we put Melbourne on Windows Server 2022. And now what we're going to do is we're going in and we're looking at that server and we're validating that, yes, the shares have come across, the permissions have come across, the files have come across. And if we go now to the namespace server, now that everything's migrated across to server 2022, we can see that all of that is now working.
So that looked pretty easy. You did most of that through just Windows Admin Center and PowerShell sessions.
We did indeed. So, Sonia, just remediate, give us some remedial stuff on DFS.
Totally. So, we've talked briefly about how organizations often have multiple file shares off multiple servers. If you were there in the early days of your organization when it deployed Windows Server, there's a really good chance that the file share structure and the servers that you set up no longer look like that today as things kind of explode and people set up different data in different places. And we have talked about how it can be hard to find things on those file shares, and that's the problem that distributed file services solves, both before and now in the modern day. And then we showed you with storage migration services how it not only moves the files, but it also moves the share permissions and the file permissions, replaces that identity, and you can migrate to 2019 or 2022, and even older file servers to Azure Edition, even on Azure Stack HCI. So there's some cool new features that you can take advantage of, but the migration process using that tool is the same.
Yep. Storage migration services is absolutely your way of migrating file servers, and you can use it even to bring, if you're using Azure Stack HCI and running Azure Edition there, and you want to take advantage of SMB over Quick, which is the best protocol to use for file sharing, you can go and run it on Azure Edition on Azure Stack HCI. Okay, Sonia, tell me about securing file servers.
Look, securing file servers is really something that you need to consider when we're talking about this concept of defense in depth. So defense in depth is about making sure that you make it as hard as possible through all of the stages of an attacker and all of the things that they're trying to get in to make it as difficult as possible. Similar to making sure that you've locked all the doors on your house and your car and everything else, you really do want to make it as tough as possible. So let's start by looking at securing the operating system and what tweaks that we can do in Windows Server to give you an extra level of security that might not be on by default. Then looking at securing authentication and permissions and what we can do with that, and finally securing it at the network layer. So what settings can we turn on to make sure that we're using more secure network communication protocols?
Okay, do you want to take us through securing a file server, Sonia?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm back here in Windows Admin Center, and I'm going to connect to this Adelaide server. Did you hit that? There you go. And under Windows Admin Center, I'm going to scroll down to our files and file sharing area. And there are some security things under here, under file shares. Now this shows me all the different file shares, and I can go and take a look at Jupyter. And my Jupyter file share has these settings down the bottom for enabling SMB encryption. So this is what technical debt looks like to an IT pro. It is turning off some of the older things that might have been on by default when we deployed them that were built for another time that doesn't exist anymore because man-in-the-middle attacks, security has got a heck of a lot more sophisticated than it used to be. So we can go back and make some tweaks like turning on enabling SMB encryption to make sure that that's required when people are accessing these file shares.
Now, you just did that at the file share level. Can we do that for the entire file server?
Yeah, absolutely. We sure can. So, taking a look at the file share settings for the server, we got the green tick that SMB1 isn't installed, which is good because that is not a very secure protocol in the real world anymore. And we have the option here to make sure that we require that SMB signing at the file server level and also require SMB3 encryption from any clients that are connecting to this file share. It is not difficult to do. These settings are really easy to find there in Windows Admin Center. You just need to go and turn them on and it will give you another level of protection for that really important data in those file shares.
And when you do that, that means that all of the SMB traffic that goes from your clients to your servers fully encrypted, and that all of the traffic, the client will be authenticated as well as the server will be authenticated. Okay, show us some more.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so that's updated those SMB settings. Now let's go and take a look. What I'm going to do now is under roles and features. So Windows Admin Center again, so I don't need to remote to the box and get under the adding files, the roles and features there. I'm going to turn on BitLocker drive encryption. So this is going to add the BitLocker drive encryption feature into Windows Server so that I can then go and turn it on. It's going to require a reboot, but that particular thing does need to be installed as a role and feature, and then when it is installed, we can go and turn it on.
And the thing that we're doing here with the security is we're doing little steps at a time. We're not able to provide you with a complete block that's going to make everything more secure.
Yeah, so now I'm going to go and use a PowerShell command to enable this BitLocker encryption on the drive. BitLocker is super cool because apart from encrypting the drive, if the drive is physically removed from that server and put somewhere else, it also protects your virtual hard drive files for your VMs. So if someone gets into your network and they manage to copy out your VHD, your virtual hard drive files for your VMs, if they go and try and access it, they will not be able to access those files and the contents in them. They won't be able to mount that file server because it's not on the original disk that was BitLocker encrypted.
And that's very important. Even if someone gets access to your backups, if those VHDs are encrypted, well, that's going to make it just a bit more difficult for the attacker to get access to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And now Windows Admin Center is showing that our BitLocker status is fully encrypted. So again, another level of protection. Now, let me take you into, ta-da, local group policy editor.
And not only did Sonia just use the local group policy editor, she did it on Server Core. So with Server Core, there's a thing called Features on Demand that actually gives you access to a bunch of very normal tools that you will have used for the last 20 years to manage your Windows Server boxes. And here, we're using the local group policy editor to edit some of the security settings on this Server Core box locally.
Yeah, and it's interesting because Server Core in of itself is another security mechanism because it doesn't have, by default, all of that graphical user interface. There are some programs that cannot run if they don't have some of those components underneath. So by not providing them in Server Core, it's actually another sort of layer of security. But in Local Group Policy Editor, we're going to scroll down and we're going to turn on and look at controlled folder access. So I'm going to start by configuring protected folders. What does that mean? Basically, this is the scope. I'm going to list the folders that I want to be protected, and I'm actually just going to put in the E drive, which will do all of the folders underneath that as well. So this is setting the scope of the folders that I would like to be protected. I haven't told it yet how I'm going to protect them and what I want it to do. So let's apply those folders into our scope and click on Configure Controlled Folder Access. Now, when I go and enable this, I'm going to put it to Block Disk Modification. What this means is that it's only going to let trusted applications get access to this disk. Now, Microsoft Defender Antivirus will automatically detect some of the more common programs that it will trust, especially if they're other Microsoft programs, for example. But you can go and add in other programs that you need. But it is this really cool sort of level of protection. If something else tries to execute on the server and it's not known as a trusted application, it's not going to have the ability to write to this disk and to modify the files in this folder. And then here's the configured allowed applications. So as well as Microsoft Defender being able to trust some of the known programs, if I've gone and installed an application, I need something to run that's a line of business application, I can go and whitelist that so that it will get the access that it needs to the files.
So here you've got group policy at the domain level, you've got an organizational unit called file servers, and you look like you're going to be doing some group policy to the OU.
Yeah, totally. It looks 2022. Group policy is still a thing. So we've got our servers and our organizational unit here, and this is for all of our file servers are in this particular OU, and we're going to apply this group policy to them. What I'm doing under here is going under the different security settings, and there is one in particular that I'm looking for under security settings that you'll find under here in security options. Now, remember how we talked about securing it at the different levels? So we've got the operating system, and we've got, the network at the top, and we've got authentication in the middle. This is about making sure that the server will reject any of those other protocols. And we've done SMB, but here in group policy, we can do NTLM. So again, New Technologies LAN Manager, I think it stood for back in the day. Again, a more insecure protocol with too much being sent in plain text, and we are going to make sure that anything that tries to connect using that protocol is not going to be allowed. And then under Windows Defender Firewall, we can also turn on a connection security rule, and we're going to add a connection security rule in here. And we're going to force it to require authentication for our internal connections and request it for outbound. So again, really making sure that anything that's connecting to this file share has to use Kerberos authentication, which is our newer protocols with our ticket granting tickets, and really forcing out those other older protocols.
And the important thing about a connection security rule, it means that if someone came into your network, plugged in something like a Raspberry Pi or something like that, that was sitting there trying a whole lot of different attacks against your file servers, by requiring any connection to be already authenticated, it's again putting another layer of difficulty. It's not just, I got on your network, I managed your file share, I attacked. It's like, no, you actually have to authenticate. With NTLM, you can block it at the entire domain, but you might not be in a position to do that. So what you can do is you can block it for individual workgroup servers, such as file servers.
Beautiful. Okay, now let's take a look at File Server Resource Manager. And this isn't a tool that's very widely known, but it also has some cool features in it. What I'm going to do by turning on in here, File Server Resource Manager, is file screens. So I can actually configure a policy here to say block executable files. Now, I'm going to set the scope of where I want those executable files to be blocked. And I was talking before about restricting programs from being able to execute on the files. This isn't that. What this is going to do is it is going to stop anybody from being able to write an executable file into my file share. So notepad.exe is an executable file. If I go to one of the file shares that is not protected with this file screen, I can quite happily drag and drop that notepad.exe, and it should let me pop that in there. Nobody knows, and I've got potentially a dangerous executable file sitting in that file share. But Jupyter, I protect it, and when I try and put this executable file into that file share, I'm going to get this error that I need permission, and no matter how many times I try, I'm not going to be allowed to write an executable file into that file share. Another great little security tip, if that folder primarily for your users has your PowerPoint files, your Excel spreadsheets, your Word documents, does not need to be anywhere near an executable file.
And the idea there is, again, defense in depth. You want to only have people storing files on file servers that should be stored on those file servers. When you're securing your servers, make sure that you go through and look at permissions. People stuff permissions up all the time. They give write and read access to things that they should not provide access to. Turn on access-based enumeration. If you turn on access-based enumeration, someone simply cannot see anything that they don't have permission to. We've got a set of things here, but make sure that you have SMB1 disabled. It'll at least make Ned Pyle extremely happy.
If you only do one thing after watching this talk, it's disable SMB1.
Okay, so we want to talk about distributed hybrid file services, but one of the ways we want to demonstrate that, and one of the ways that you can make your file servers better, is by migrating from DFS replication through to Azure File Sync. So with our original migration, we moved from 2008 R2 to 2022, but we were still replicating using DFS. What you can do with Azure File Sync is you can have replication managed by Azure, and Azure become the back end to your replication. So we see here that if I go into the Mars directory and I create a new file, that file is replicated because DFS is set up. So I call it proof of replication alpha. And then if instead of using the DFS namespace, I just go in to each particular folder, I can see on Sydney, I go to Mars, I've got proof of replication alpha. If I go across to the Adelaide file server, I can see proof of replication alpha. And if I go across to Melbourne, well, it's replicating. So replication exists prior to us performing the upgrade. The next thing I do is I bring up the DFS management console. And I'm going to go and remove all of those servers from the replication group because I don't want to use DFS for replication anymore. So I just go through and delete them. Those servers are no longer using DFS for replication. Okay, then I'm going to go and jump into those servers and actually fully remove that particular feature. So again, just going in, I could do it through Windows Admin Center. Sometimes it's faster to do things with PowerShell than it is to wait for a web browser to spin up. Work with what tools you like to work with. That's the secret to administration. Don't work with a set of tools that you're uncomfortable with if you're not used to them. Okay, so I restart all those servers. I come back to Adelaide. Adelaide's running Server 2022. I've connected via Windows Admin Center. Now, Windows Admin Center allows me to go in and actually connect Azure services that are relevant. I could go and do Azure Arc and do everything, or I can click on Azure File Sync and I can set up Azure File Sync for these servers. And what it'll do is it'll allow me to set it up all in Azure, as well as download and configure the agent and then register this server with everything that's going on in Azure. So there we've gone and created a resource group, a storage sync service. It's then, once it's got the storage sync service, going to provision this server with an agent and install the agent on the server. And while it's done that, I can then go to Melbourne, I can go to the hybrid center, I can click on Set up Azure File Sync, and then I can click Setup, and then it'll again pull down that agent, but it'll already pre-configured because it's connected to the same subscription, and it'll pull down the agent and then register that server with the storage sync service. I then jump across to Sydney. So all of these servers, I'm going through and connecting them up to Azure. I'm connecting them up to a storage sync service in Azure, and then they're enrolling these servers. And you can see that this is a very easy operation. At this point, I haven't had to go into the console. Now I'm in the console. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set a back-end storage account up. This back-end storage account is going to host file shares that all of the file servers are going to replicate with. This will hold the copy in the cloud that they will connect to. So I'm again putting all of this in Australia. We're just going through with the defaults here. We're not doing anything particularly exciting. We're just using default storage encryption. We've got our storage account. We click create, it creates a storage account. Once we've got the storage account, what we do is we go and add each of the file shares that we want to add to that storage account. So here we add the Jupyter file share. Then we go and add the Mars file share. And as you can imagine, we then go through and add Mercury, Venus, Neptune, Saturn, and of course, Ned's dogs. So once we've done that, we go to the sync service and we look at our registered servers. And here we've got the 3 registered servers that have got the agent installed and connected through to that storage sync service. So we're going to then create a sync group. A sync group is essentially a replication group. It says take these on-prem servers with this path and register it and synchronize against this particular Azure file share. So I'm choosing my storage account. It's the Jupyter sync group. I then select the Jupyter file share and I click create.
I like how you've kept the names consistent, and this is pretty much the cloud version of your DFS replication that we were in before.
And that will absolutely simplify that process. So we do that for each one of these file shares. So we do it for Ned's dogs. Then we go back. Now that we've created all of those sync groups, what we're going to then is say, right, for Jupyter, add these server endpoints. So we say take Adelaide, this path on Adelaide, and then synchronize all of that up. The other thing we're doing is we're turning on cloud tiering. Now, one of your big problems with file servers is constantly running out of space.
Oh, it never happens.
No, it never happens at all. And we know that when you turn on cloud tiering, what it does is it will automatically look at when a file was most recently accessed. And if it hasn't been accessed after a certain amount of time, it'll keep a full copy of the file in the cloud and a stub on premises. The stub takes up no resources on premises other than just the amount of data required to store the name. Now, the advantage of that is that suddenly your file servers become functionally infinite because we know that most people only use new data. All of the old data is tiered to the cloud, and when it's actually tiered to the cloud, it means that that anybody who wants to access that older data can have it synchronized down from the cloud.
Yeah, it's automatically going to rehydrate for them and they won't know any difference.
So we do that for each of the server endpoints. We set all of the same settings. Here we can see that we're doing exactly the same eJupyter. It then goes provisions and then synchronizes. And we can then go through that and do exactly the same thing for each one of those other file shares. Okay, so the proof is in the pudding. And here we go to Tailwind Traders files. We go to the Mars folder, now that they're all connected, and we go and create a text document to actually prove that replication has occurred.
Yeah, this is IT Pro testing, right?
So we call it proof of replication beta. We then go and navigate to the Melbourne folder, and it hasn't replicated there yet, so we know that we didn't write it to that server, because when you use DFS namespaces, you don't know where it's actually going to be written. But if we go and look at Adelaide, we can see that it's on Adelaide, and if we come back to Melbourne, we see it's on Melbourne. But the other thing that we can do is we can jump into the Azure console and pull up that file share for the storage account, and we select the file service, we select the file share, and we can see that that file, that proof of replication file, is also present in the cloud.
Nice.
Which is fairly cool. So, with Azure File Sync, as we said, it solves the problem of running out of space. The other thing that you can do is that you can connect distributed file services with obviously on-prem replicated Azure File Sync endpoints, as well as you can point a DFS endpoint at an Azure file share.
That's right. And so it's not about anymore about having good connectivity between one branch office and another. As long as those branch offices have got access to the cloud, they can use that sync mechanism, and then your remote workers, if they want to, if it's easier for them, they can access the files in the cloud, and they're the same ones that are replicating to these servers on-prem.
Now, the other thing that a distributed file server infrastructure allows you to do is by having a copy of everything in the cloud, you can perform your backups in the cloud using Azure Backup. So rather than worrying about backing up individual file servers, everything is being replicated up to the cloud. You simply perform the backups there. You're not then worried about tapes. You're not worried about all of your backup on-prem. It's already replicated off-site.
You missed a good tape.
Okay, so in terms of optimizing your file servers, what can we do to optimize our file services?
Oh, look, I could talk a little bit about deduplication. It is one of my favorite things. And you might know deduplication as a term if you do anything with backup and disaster recovery, but we can turn that on our file servers. What it's going to do is it's going to look at a file and it's going to find the common pieces and the bits and bytes and store them once, and then replace the file with a repass header that says, hey, in this file, go and use that block once, use that block twice, use that block 3 times, and pull together the file again. Again, all seamless to the end user, but the amount of disk space that you're going to save by storing those common blocks only once and then referencing them, hidden little tips and tricks that you might not have even turned on your file server.
So essentially also, when you're thinking about your file servers, make sure that you're keeping your large files on-prem, because people don't want to copy those down from the cloud. Less recently accessed files are stored in Azure. If a file server is hardly ever being used, then think about moving the entire thing to an Azure file share and then using a DFS namespace to just point at it so your on-prem people don't know that it's actually been migrated.
Totally.
Storage Replica is a technology that you can use for on-prem disaster recovery that allows you to do full volume replication very efficiently. So you can have an important file share on-prem replicated to another server without it interrupting. And in the event that you lose something, well, you can just go and flick over to the replica. Anyway, just to summarize.
Yeah, so we've talked about upgrading and running your file servers on server core for a more secure experience. We've covered a few things you can turn on to harden those file servers, using DFS namespaces to give that one entry point to your file, and then using Azure Files to synchronize the shared folders between your on-prem and the cloud. And then finally, Storage Replica so that you can have an on-prem cutover copy for a disaster recovery, business continuity scenario without having pulling everything down from the cloud again.
Now, if you want to see more of these demo-focused sessions at Ignite, make sure you go and fill out your evaluation. Put in that you have enjoyed higher or deeper level technical content. Thank you very much for your attention. And Sonia and I will be out on the Skybridge.
We're heading to the Skybridge. If you're in the room in Seattle, come and find us at the Skybridge.
Thank you very much. Have a wonderful Ignite.